They become the slow poisoning of a woman who was never, ever meant to be silent. The hesitation that you may feel, it lives in your ancestral DNA. What you don't speak does not go quiet. It actually either turns to bitterness in your body or beauty in the world. Most women in the second half of life are not quiet because they have nothing to say. They're quiet because they've spent decades being taught that the cost of speaking would be too high. And then one day, somewhere around the second half of life, the words that have been stewing in you start to bubble up. You can feel them in your throat. You can feel them in the resentment that you feel. You can feel them in the conversations you keep having in your head with people who aren't in the room. And these feelings might express themselves through words that you've swallowed at the dinner table and become resentment by bedtime. Or maybe the opinions that you held back in that meeting and replayed all the way home. Or what you wish you said to your mother 20 years ago. And maybe even in the texts or the drafted emails or letters that were drafted and deleted and drafted and deleted. Maybe you even feel a certain amount of bitterness kind of leaking out toward the wrong targets. What I want to share today might be the most important of all of the keys, or at least the most difficult, because it's the one the world has worked the hardest to silence in women. And once you understand what your voice is actually for, you'll understand why this is the case. Welcome to Soul Knows the Way, a podcast for women in the second half of life who sense a soul hunger they can no longer ignore, a longing for depth, truth, and a life lived from the inside out. I'm Kim Marie, soul guide, author, and I'm here to walk that journey with you. Now let's talk about articulating your voice. In our last conversation, in the prior episode, we explored the fourth of the 7 keys to reclaim your soul, the love key. You can download that guide totally free in the show notes or description if you haven't done so already. We spoke of shifting out of codependency roles that most of us learn to embody and what it can look like to step out of them, to shift from victim to creator, from rescuer to beacon, and from perpetrator to challenger. Today, we're going to step into the key that the challenger, the one who has the ability to shift the future, cannot live without. Now, a challenger who cannot speak is not really a challenger. She's still a person waiting for permission, and our evolution is depending on her voice. I want to speak about what most women are actually living with around this 5th key that we'll be exploring more deeply today, because I think you may recognize yourself faster in these symptoms or expressions rather than in the solutions to what to do about it just yet. So first of all, we may find ourselves catching ourselves saying, oh gosh, I sounded just like my mother, or I sounded just like my father. Or we might even catch ourselves speaking words that are not really ours. They're opinions that we absorbed over time, maybe from various teachers, or maybe from our parents, or maybe from things we heard in the media, or whatever. And maybe it's beliefs that have gone unquestioned. We find ourselves speaking these things, and maybe one day we suddenly say, is that what I really think? Like, I'm just kind of repeating what somebody else said before. Another significant way that this expresses itself, this need for this 5th key to reclaim your soul, is when we find ourselves expecting others to know our thoughts and resenting it when they don't. We might also find ourselves saying, oh, I should have said something. I totally should have said something, and looping in our minds and stewing over it for hours. We may have created written material, texts, emails, or we may have expressed in our minds boundaries, but these messages were never sent. We may have unspoken words that manifest into something in our bodies like a headache or a jaw tightening or a tight throat, or maybe the snap at our child or partner that is really just misplaced resentment because we didn't speak those words before. And there's a certain level of a growing feeling of enough inside of you. This, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And yet a tremendous discomfort based on not really knowing what to do about that. So I want to share an example of how the words that need speaking are left unsaid and the result of that, how it looks. Maybe this sounds familiar to you. There's a woman, she's at home and she's trying to get dinner going. She wants to get her family fed. There's an event that they're going to. They want to be on time. She knows what has to happen. She has all the details mapped out. She knows what the kids need to wear for the event. Maybe it's a school event or something like that. And the husband comes home from work and she's frantically trying to get the kids settled and do what needs to be done to get them ready. She's got some food on the stove cooking and people are asking her questions. And pretty soon she finds herself snapping at them or just, oh, what's going on with this food? Oh my gosh, I burnt this. Or she's huffing and puffing and slamming cabinet doors. Things are just not working. She's starting to steam inside and wondering, why on earth are my kids or my partner not stepping in here? Why aren't they doing anything? And the anger builds and the resentment builds and the exhaustion builds. The dinner, well, it gets done. Barely. They finish dinner. And then they're frantically going into the car. And pretty soon they're fighting traffic and it's stressful and they're just trying their best to hurry up and arrive safely. And they arrive, but now everybody's irritated. And they're basically at an outing nobody really wants to be at. And they don't really want to be together because of this whole tension that was happening before. But if we look back at that story, which is all too familiar, maybe you recognize it. Maybe it was something you recognize yourself as having done. Maybe it's something your mother did. The thing about this scenario is, in the midst of all that, there was not a single request made. No voice was raised. No plan was shared. And let's be honest, women are the best project managers on the planet. We know what has to be done. We know the plan. We understand what needs to happen in order to successfully cross the finish line, right? We see all the things. I've had so many clients where these kinds of scenarios can come up. And if I ask a client who had a similar experience like that, why didn't you say something? 9 times out of 10, the answer will be, well, they should know. Nope. Sorry. We cannot expect others to read our minds and think like we do or understand and see what we see. The sacred feminine has been suppressed and ignored for so long that her powers of diffuse awareness are inaccessible to most. As women, we have more access to them. And when you have them, you must articulate them. All of the symptoms and the example that I shared, they're the same thing, wearing different costumes. They're unspoken words, and unspoken words don't disappear. They turn toxic in the body. They become resentment. They become bitterness. They become anger that lands on the wrong target. They become the slow poisoning of a woman who was never, ever meant to be silent. We have had silencing for centuries, perhaps even millennia. But at the very least, in our more recent history, we can point to things like the witch trials in Europe and colonial America. If you spoke too boldly or plainly or openly, if you healed too independently, if you held too much knowledge, you were named a heretic. You were burned, you were drowned, you were hanged. Tens of thousands to possibly hundreds of thousands. We don't really know the exact numbers, were killed over the course of 300 years. These mostly were women, and often many women in the second half of life, because these women are the ones that often start to speak up. And so whatever the number, the cultural memory of what happens to women who speak didn't vanish within us. In fact, it lives in our DNA. It went into our bodies and maybe even into our throats. This shows up even in our modern culture with a sense of daily silencing that we hear all the time. Oh, don't make a fuss. Don't be so emotional. Calm down. Ladies don't do XYZ, right? This is unbelievable, the level at which we keep hearing these silencing kinds of things. And maybe in some ways we call it political correctness these days, or don't upset the apple cart, don't rock the boat, right? We all are modern descendants, and these phrases are modern descendants of obedience doctrines. These laws from churches and other cultural and societal norms that held women as property, limiting our rights, limiting our voice. This isn't our personal failing. The hesitation that you may feel before you speak, it lives in your ancestral DNA. It was put into the body of women centuries before you were born, and it's still being put into our daughters, not intentionally. But naming where the silence comes from is a helpful part of learning to speak through it. And yet, something in the second half of life will not let this continue. And that's really good news. Something starts saying enough. That something has a name. And we've known her for a long time. And she's ready to show herself. She's called Sacred Voice, the power of the word. And she holds the articulate key number 5 on our journey to unlock the wisdom of our soul. Your voice was never optional. What you don't speak doesn't vanish. It either turns to toxin within you or to creation through you. The throat chakra is the energy center where that fate is decided. Our heart knows and our mind articulates through the throat, which carries the knowing into the world, and the mind's wisdom back into the body. So this throat chakra is bringing this deeper understanding, this depth within us, this deeper wisdom out into the world, along with integrating it around the level of knowing that comes from the mind, that comes from higher thought. So if this chakra is closed, then that knowing, that doorway, that opportunity to bring forth the creative power of voice has no way out. It backs up, it pressurizes, it leaks out in ways that it's not meant to, maybe in the form of resentment or in the tone that just doesn't work to keep a relationship steady. Maybe it's in a clenching jaw or headaches or that snap at the wrong person or undeserving person. We may also get stuck in our head, intellectualizing instead of feeling in our body. So often we hear that concept of being stuck in the head, or they can only think from here up, right? From the throat up. And that's because there is something stuck there that isn't flowing. It's not integrating the lower aspect of our being, the deeper wisdom aspect of our presence with the higher thought process. But when it's open, that same wisdom can find its destination. It becomes the word. It becomes the creative word. It becomes the question we need to ask. It becomes the song we need to sing in our lives. And it can become the conversation that changes everything. To converse means literally to change together. How beautiful is that? But if we don't speak, if we don't find that voice, how can we change? It can also become that book that has yet to be written, or the boundary that has yet to be set. It can become the prayer that needs lifting up, or the laughter that needs to be expressed and shared. The throat is the small, narrow gate between what you know and what you actually create. And to reclaim your voice is to reopen that gate. In the first half of life, we're taught to be, you could say, palatable. The maiden and the mother archetypes have a certain form that includes a lot of expectation. We're expected to soothe and to smooth things over and to keep the peace and not to say much, to nurture, to take care of things. But then something begins to shift. Our hormones, some would say, but I think that's a cop-out, honestly. I think it's an easy thing to blame. I think this second half of life shift is absolutely more about a shift in our expression on a whole different level. It's a rebirthing. It's an initiation rite that we are passing through. And so sure, those hormones may change, but so do our roles. We're not playing the role of maiden and mother anymore. We become a mirror for everything, and everything is changing, and a new archetype moves into the body. And this is the archetype of the crone. Now, the crone archetype is one many women entering the second half of life resist. I sure did at first, but she is so wise and so worthy of embodying. And I know we'll talk more about the crone in future episodes for sure. But the beauty of the crone that I just want to speak right now, that is worth taking in and sitting with, is that the crone is not bitter. She's not loud for loudness' sake, right? She's lived long enough to know what's true. And yet she's short enough on time to stop pretending she doesn't. That's an interesting concept. She's lived long enough to know what's real, what's true, what has meaning. But she's short enough on time to know what doesn't. And the crone is the one in you who finally says, I'm not going to die with these words still inside of me. So I want to talk a little bit about what the authentic voice actually is, what it means to articulate with that authentic voice. We're definitely not regurgitating absorbed concepts. We're not repeating tradition or culture or community thinking. We are ultimately articulating from our own unique point of view. And there is going to be a unique point of view for every human soul on the planet, because we each have our own lived experience, our own direct and deep knowing, our own connections. It's going to come from our own values, our own perspective that is shaped by the soul's life experience. It's going to ask questions that challenge the status quo. And yes, some people are not going to like that. And often this authentic voice connects the dots that no one else connects, because no one else has lived your life with your experience. So let's come back to that challenger role. We talked about that role in the last episode. So if you haven't watched that, you might like to go back and check that out. But the challenger is the transformed expression of the codependent role of the perpetrator. So remember in that last episode when we named the shift from perpetrator into challenger? The challenger does not lash out. The challenger doesn't diminish. But the challenger also does not stay silent. The challenger says the true thing, even when the true thing is uncomfortable, especially then. The articulate key is what makes the challenger possible. Without voice, the codependency triangle wins by default. We cannot find healthy interdependence when we don't speak or allow others to speak from their lived truth. And by the way, I am talking about capital T truth, Not every vulnerability or every tit for tat or every little detail or every processed emotion and challenge. Much of that, if we're really doing our inner work, we're doing that on the deeper level, and we don't need to be speaking every detail of these things. This is about speaking wisdom that comes from the deepest, truest self, so that we can have a voice that serves in co-creating the future. So this co-creation, this voice of co-creation, it's an actual expression that we can make in our lives, not just a side practice of expression for those who are artistic. I believe expression, creative expression specifically, is what human beings are here for. We are here to express and bring into form what has never existed before. This act of creation is the act we share with the source of all that is. This is our divine right. This is what makes us free creatures on the planet as co-creators of our evolutionary future. If we were made in the image of the Creator, then to create is our very highest calling. I do believe, regardless of your religion or spiritual practice or any of that, that we have a spark of the divine within us, calling us to be creators. And our voice is the most fundamental form of creation that we're given, that's able to be expressed in many forms. It can be practiced in the simplest forms or the most complex of ways. Your voice isn't about being heard. It's about creating. You don't speak so others will agree with you, though many of us are still kind of stuck on that in our effort to survive a dominance and control world. We speak because the soul of the world is articulated through us, through your individual soul. And what is in you to say is part of how the world becomes, how the world evolves. Now, in the 7 Keys guide, I invited you to think of a conversation or a moment in which you wished you'd spoken something and didn't. And be sure to download that guide if you haven't already. It's completely free, and it's in the description below. So in that guide, I ask things like, what was it that you wish you'd said? What kept you from saying it? What was the consequence of not saying it? What about how it might show up or has shown up in the days and weeks and years that followed that situation? What might have been the consequence of speaking up? And how does that compare with what actually happened in the silence? Now, these aren't questions to answer in the comments below or to just gloss over. These are questions to live with for a day or a few days. They're how the throat starts to remember that it has a door, that it has a capacity to open. And we need to honor the practices and the opportunities to do that opening. The throat doesn't reopen through more thinking. It reopens through use, through sound. And there are many ways that we can do that. And I know this may sound rudimentary, and we may look at this and say, well, okay, but how's that actually going to help me speak when I need to speak in a difficult situation, or I'm in the middle of conflict, or I'm having a challenge? Believe it or not, just the use of our voice can begin to open something in us that makes us feel more steady and allows something to flow through this throat chakra area that starts to say, oh, this is okay. She's letting me do this. And so there are a few simple things I want to share that can help you to do this through practice. One of them is singing. Yes, singing in the car, singing in the shower, singing in the kitchen. this isn't about being good. It doesn't matter the quality of how you sing. It's about the throat moving. Another that can be really powerful is something I actually did also to help move emotion. When my children were little, when I was first going through my becoming a single mom and wondering how on earth am I going to do this, there were times I would get so angry, but I didn't want to take it out on them. I didn't want those words or those emotions or those feelings to stay stuffed inside of me. And I knew I needed to let something out through my voice. And so I screamed. And I made it a game if my children were around because I didn't want to scare them. And I would say things like, Mommy has to scream right now. Do you want to scream with me? Let's all see if we can scream really, really loud. And we would just sit there or lay on my bed and just scream and pound our fists and our feet. And then we would end up laughing so loud and so hard. And it was just one of those things where it's like you just get this energy to move. You let something out. And of course, if you can't do that with other people around, you might scream into a pillow or into the wind or privately in your backyard. But there's wisdom in the scream that the body's been holding. And when you let it out, when you offer that as a practice, it can really help get things moving in that space. Another is the practice of using made up sounds. And this might be for emotions that don't have words or words you've yet to find. And it's funny because we have lots of sounds kind of like this, like ugh, right? And a lot of people would write that out as UGH, ugh, and or or right? We make a growl or this hissing sound or a hum sound or a sigh that just comes out like, ugh, right? And we make these noises. And so often those are frowned upon. And we don't want to do it around other people that might not understand what's happening. But there are so many times, like even if we're trying to take a deep breath and tune into our breath, sometimes it's really helpful to just receive a breath. And on the exhale, let the sound come out. And just let that flow. There's another sound that I learned about from Kimberly Ann Johnson's work. And she does a lot of somatic experience type work. And it's this voo, voo, like VOO. And the v sound vibrates the lips. And the ooh, it kind of gets the throat vibrating. And it's this low, sustained vibration that happens through the throat and the chest and the body that can actually help regulate the nervous system. And so there are so many different ways we can express the voice, including artistic voice. Artistic voice is a great way, like through theater, through writing, through poetry, through journaling, through voice notes to ourselves, to others. Right? Anything that gives words a destination beyond our head, beyond being stuck in the throat like a lump, is going to help open and allow for that articulate key to turn, to bring forth the power of the creative word. And maybe the most important practice of all is actually speaking imperfectly, allowing yourself to say the wrong thing, to say the not quite right thing, to hear yourself stumble without collapsing back into the silence just because you did. The true voice is found on the other side of the failed one. It can't be found any other way, unfortunately, because none of us want to say the wrong thing. None of us want to make that mistake. None of us want to hurt someone's feelings because we said too much or too little. But it's so important to give ourselves the chance to do that. So again, there's so much more and there's more depth on some of the exercises in the 7 keys to reclaim your soul. So be sure to spend some time with that and download that for yourself. So when that space in the throat, when that space for articulating, when that articulate key turns, we might start to notice how it lives in our ordinary days. Instead of simply not pressing send on that email or picking up the phone to make the requests that you really wish you could make, maybe you still don't make it. Maybe you're not quite ready to make it. Of course, eventually the hope is you will be. But even if not, a simple little way it can show up that you're working on it is that you start to notice, I didn't do that thing, but I recognize why now. And maybe there are things that your partner's done for years that have remained unnamed to him, but you find yourself able to name that thing, that irritation, that thing you wish he did differently or would consider differently. But you are able to do it with kindness and clarity without needing a different outcome. You're just simply able to speak it, whether he chooses to listen or not. That's something we can't control. That goes into a whole other topic that we could certainly talk about later. So much of our challenge in stepping into our own sense of empowerment and reclaiming our soul is the struggle to understand when someone else doesn't honor that. But that doesn't mean we don't allow ourselves to keep practicing anyway. You may also notice that the opinion that you held back in the meeting is now spoken through the insecurity. You may say it shaking. You may say it with a dry mouth. You may say it with uncertainty, but you say it. And maybe instead of stuffing the sounds and the words, you're able to express them through some of these tools that I mentioned, whether it's the singing, the screaming, the sounds that you make. Maybe that no that was waiting in your throat for months is actually able to be spoken. Maybe you find yourself just giving that compliment to a total stranger and not worrying about whether or not you sound silly or the stranger takes it the wrong way or whatever. And instead of not saying it and walking by, you just go ahead and say it because it feels good. Maybe the prayer or the intention that you didn't say out loud, that felt too big to say, too big to own, actually gets spoken. These shifts happen in little ways, moment by moment. And what's in you to say is part of how the world becomes. It becomes itself. And to withhold your voice is not just personal. It's not just a personal cost. It's a cost the soul of the world pays for your silence, for our silence. Your voice is a doorway through which the soul creates, and we need your voice. So in this journey through the 7 keys to reclaim your soul, so far, the root key gave us the ground that we stand upon. The empty key gave us the space to take up within our lives. The claim key helped us find a sense of sovereignty. The love key gave us the alchemical fire to bring forth more of our love and truth in the world. And this articulate key gives us the bridge to the world that we're here to help create. Gives us the force, the opportunity to move in our lives. So often they say that every creation begins with an idea, but if that idea is not articulated, if it is not written down, if it is not expressed, if it is not collaborated upon with a friend or whatever it is that it needs to make that creative force become manifest, then nothing can happen. So I want you to take a look at the articulate section in the 7 keys to reclaim your soul guide that is in the show notes, and take a look at the activation. We lightly touched on a little bit here. I shared some different things here, but there are deeper exercises that you can go with. And just as a little side note, the work of turning the articulate key, finding our true voice, is not easy for a woman to do alone. The throat reopens faster in the company of women who are doing the same thing. Women who will let her stumble. Women who will let her say the not quite right thing without correcting her or performing for her or fixing her. women who are ready to create that kind of safety for each other to blossom. Now, that company is available in my free community called the Soulstead. It's away from social media and the noise. It's a sacred soul sanctuary that is completely free. I also have my Solace program that is a paid expression and a different level. But the Soulstead may be a beautiful entry place to come and begin to connect with these women and share different things that you want to express and practice this kind of expression. Now, in my Solace program, we go deeper. We have lessons about the art of conversation and communication, and we dive much deeper into, okay, well, exactly how do I do this? And this is a soul sanctuary where voice work is actually practiced and witnessed and held over time. And there's a link in the description for all of these things. What you don't speak does not go quiet. It doesn't become unimportant. It actually either turns to bitterness in your body or beauty in the world. Your voice is the small bridge between those two fates. You're not a vessel for someone else's words. You're not a regurgitator of inherited beliefs. You are a soul who came with something to say. And the soul of the world is waiting to create through you. So say it imperfectly. Say it trembling. Say it before you're ready, because you are never going to feel ready. Let's face it. Say it anyway, because the woman in you who's been waiting to be heard has been waiting her whole life. And she will not wait forever. Next time, in the next episode, we're going to move into the 6th of the 7 keys. It's the Intuit key. Once that throat opens up, we have to learn to listen for the voice of our true essence and the inner wisdom that helps us speak most effectively and in alignment with our soul. So I'll see you there. Until next time, keep tuning into the language of soul, because soul knows the way.